Lord be with you. So, as you realize, today is the third Sunday of the month, so it'll be an extended homily question-answer discussion, so get your thinking hats on. And I've chosen a reading, prompted actually by Chris, in a question he asked a few weeks ago, taken from Paul's letter to the Romans, and it's Paul at his tortured best. For the good that I want, I do not do, but I practice the very evil that I do not want. But if I am doing the very thing I do not want, I am no longer the one doing it, but sin, which lives in me. I find then the principle that evil is present in me. Me, the one who wants to do good. For I joyfully concur with the law of God in the inner man, but I see a different law in the members of my body, waging war against the law of my mind and making me a prisoner of the law of sin, which is in my members. Wretched man that I am, who will set me free from this body of death? Thanks be to God, through Jesus Christ our Lord. So then, on the one hand, I myself, with my mind, I'm serving the law of God, but on the other, with my flesh, I'm serving the law of sin. Words inspired by a very confused disciple. Okay. Advertisers can be really, really creative. They can create these beautiful little mini videos, like 90-second episodes. One of my favorite of all time was done by some, I don't know, was it Pepsi or Coca-Cola, one of these soft soda people. And there's a scene where this young man in his early 20s comes home from a hard day's work, and he just wants to kind of veg out in front of the television set. So he raids his own fridge and he makes this gigantic sandwich. There's turkey and there's ham and there's lettuce and tomatoes and onions and a whole bunch of stuff, and then cuts it in two big chunks, and then fishes himself out, I'm going to say, a Pepsi Cola. Breaks open the clip in it, and he's just about to retire to the television set when the front door rings. So he puts the sandwiches up on the countertop with the soda pop, and you see his big Alsatian dog and his little kitty cat. So he goes out to the front door, and as he's out there, the dog puts his paws up, gobbles the whole sandwich, swallows it down in 3 or 4 gulps, tips the can up and goes, comes right down, and now the guy's coming in from the door. The dog grabs the cat by the scruff of the neck and puts it up onto the countertop and disappears into the sitting room and is sitting in front looking at the television. When the guy comes in, he looks at the countertop and there's the kitty. He says, "Bad kitty, bad, 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 bad kitty." And that's what I want to talk about today. I want to talk about free will, and freedom. And I'm going to make 6 main points, and then we'll open it up to the discussion. So, it could be a long day. They'll be short, Margie. The first one will be just a little brief introduction to the topic. The second one then will be the debate about free will. The third one I'll call the slide into blamelessness. The fourth one I'm going to call the evolution of free will. The fifth, limitations on free will. And then number 6, the future of free will. So that's where I'm going to take us this morning, really briefly. So a few introductory remarks. We have to distinguish between free will and freedom. They're very different. In Catholic theology, they distinguish beautifully between them. So free will is the ability to do what pleases me. Freedom is to do what pleases God. And when we say pleasing God, we don't mean that we're cravenly obedient to some distant, demanding deity in the sky who has a whip. We don't mean that. It means being totally aligned with your own inner divinity. So freedom is not about obeying a distant God. It's about total alignment with the inner divinity. It's not about obedience. It's about alignment and integrity. And there are some other big differences between free will and freedom. Free will is neither good nor bad. It's like a knife. You can use a knife to butter your bread, or you could gouge out somebody's eye with it. So free will, has no ethical value whatsoever. Freedom does. So free will can be bad, used badly or well. Freedom is always good, because freedom is the very essence of your soul. And in fact, it's the entire objective of incarnation. The whole idea of incarnation is to test yourself in a spacesuit with all its limitations to see if you can begin to align free will with freedom. So it becomes very, very important that these come together. So they're just some quick definitions. That would be the first point. The second point then, the great debate, and Chris raised it very powerfully the last time I was here, the whole question of free will itself. So what's the debate? So the debate is like this. So materialism claims that consciousness does not exist, that consciousness is merely an epiphenomenon of neuronal activity. Scientists, materialistic scientists, claim that there is no such thing as free will, and that the appearance of free will is simply molecules and neurons driving the agenda of the selfish gene, but that we have no freedom whatsoever. Now, this, for me personally, I find this a pathetic scientific argument. So I know, for instance, from quantum mechanics, that an atom is 99, and listen to how many points, there are going to be 7 nines after the decimal point. Every atom is 99.999999% empty space. 99 followed by 7 decimal places of nines. So an atom is 99.999999 empty space. So if you were literally to take all of the empty space out of every atom, in every molecule, in every brain cell of every human being who's ever lived on planet Earth, there's been about 111 billion of us cumulatively, you took all the empty matter out of all those, the amount of matter you would have left, if you took all the empty space out of it, the amount of matter you would have left would be less than a single grain of sand for the total community. Now, I find it, personally, there's no way I'm going to believe that this tiny little grain of sand is responsible for the collected works of Shakespeare, the art of Leonardo da Vinci, the discovery of relativity theory, or even what I decided to have, which breakfast cereal I decided to have this morning at 6 o'clock up in Healdsburg. Otherwise, the intelligence guiding the universe has a cosmic case of OCD that is determining which brand of cereal I can use, that I'm not deciding myself, it's being decided for me. So this idea that free will does not exist, it's a totally untestable hypothesis, which means it is totally unscientific. The essence of science is, when you propose a hypothesis, it has to be falsifiable. It has to be testable. If a hypothesis is not testable, it's not a scientific hypothesis. So the difference is that no matter what I do, somebody else is deciding for me. So I say to Karen, can you raise your right hand? Okay, put it down. Could you raise your left hand instead? Did you have a choice doing that, or was something telling you, something was determining which hand you raised and which one you didn't? Yeah? So that's not testable. So no matter what you do, you can't prove it's false. So it's non-falsifiable, which means it is totally unscientific. So it sounds really fun. It is totally unscientific. It cannot be tested. And so, if somebody were to say to me, I do not believe in free will, then what they're telling me is this, that, whoever is making that statement is not free to make that statement. There's some robot behind it that's forcing that person to make the statement, I do not believe in free will. Now, so if it's the robot you speaking, why would you believe it? Why would you believe in a robot that's telling you you're not free when you choose to believe anything you want? And if what you believe is making you unhappy or anxious or depressed, change what you believe. If it's all made up anyway, why not make up a version that makes you feel good? So if all we have are our perceptions, then start perceiving in a way that empowers you rather than disempowers you. And so it's a totally untestable and unscientific premise to begin with. So, but what happens if we totally subscribe to a belief that free will actually is predetermined by some kind of a cosmic, intelligence? Here's what happens. There is no justice in the world whatsoever. You can't be held accountable for any bad thing you do, and you can't get credit for any good thing you do. So the whole thing, that whole falls asunder. There's no meaning to life because you're just being driven by some kind of a pre-programmed, place inside in yourself. There can be no vice or no virtue. You can't really experience love or give love. You can't experience compassion or give compassion. You can't do anything bad. Nobody can do anything bad whatsoever. So there's no meaning to life. In fact, there's no civilization. The essence of civilization is that people are free to make choices, good choices or poor choices. You take free will out of the equation, civilization itself collapses completely. That's my second point. The third point then I'm going to call the slow slide into blamelessness. If you've ever been around really, really small children, Little children have absolutely no compunction about admitting what they did. Zero compunction. Until they're punished for telling the truth. So you take like a little 2-year-old baby who isn't potty trained yet, has pooped, somewhere, and is daubing it on the wall of the bedroom. And Mommy comes in, and the baby says, "Mommy, look what I did." Really, really happy about it. But if the mother comes in, depending on her tone of voice and her body language, the child is going to feel, uh-oh, something wrong here. So you can take the very same phrase, and depending on how you use it, the child is going to get totally different messages. If I say, "Cutie pie, did you do that?" I said, "Did you do that?" So my words or my body language is going to tell the child, it wasn't putting poop on the wall. That wasn't a bad thing. It was admitting that I put poop on the wall. That's the bad thing. So the child gets the message very, very quickly. That is not what she's doing is bad. It's that she's admitting to what she's just done. That's what's bad. So kids immediately get the lesson very, very, very quickly. Okay, telling the truth doesn't work. So now you have to do 2 things if you're a child. You have to deny completely you know anything about it, or you got to blame somebody else. The dog ate my homework. So you got to put the blame, someplace else. And then as adults, we pick up on this and we run with it. In fact, as adults, we learn how to double dip. We learn how to deny that we've done the bad things we've done, and we learn to claim the good things that we haven't done. So we're double dipping, in a sense. And then we've all kinds of ways of projecting our stuff onto something else. The devil made me do it. Our poor old Paul today saying, the flesh made me do it. I'll expand on that a little bit later. And then the ultimate escape is, I'm not guilty because there is no such thing as guilt, and so nobody is guilty, so nobody can be held accountable for anything. And then we've sunk as low as that's blamelessness at its bottom. That's my third point. And then the fourth point, I want to look at how does free will actually evolve, in the course of planet Earth. And it does evolve. It evolves from a starting place of robotic, pre-programmed responses to life, all the ways to the notion that if I can think it, I can do it. So that's the entire spectrum of free will. So starting at this end, what does it look like at this end? If you go to inorganic matter, like a mountain is encountering snow and wind and rain, and all kinds of atmospheric conditions. And it makes a pre-programmed response to these. It's going to weather or it's going to erode, whatever it is, but they're pre-programmed responses. You never hear of 2 mountains falling in love, getting married, and raising a family of hillocks. It doesn't happen. So they're stuck in place and they have pre-programmed responses to whatever the environment offers them. So that's one end of it. It's the robotic end of it. You move along the evolutionary scale now and you get, for instance, to a plant life. And now, plant life, they have movement, but they don't yet have mobility. So they're able, for instance, to turn their faces to the sun or turn their back to the wind. They're able to propagate themselves. So the definition of life, according to science, is to be alive, a species needs to be able to do 2 things. To feed itself and to propagate itself. Anything that can feed itself and propagate itself, that species is a life form. It's organic matter, as distinct from inorganic stuff. So plants have the ability to self-germinate. In fact, they hijack any passerby. They can hijack the wind, or a river that's flowing by, or insects, or animals, or even human beings to carry their seeds someplace else. So they have that level of mobility and that level of movement. And they also have the ability to decide what they want to give access to and what they would deny access to it. So there's an element of choice going on there with plants. So they want particular kinds of insects to come and cross-pollinate with others, and they set up attractive devices to bring those into their lives, and they ban others. So for instance, the giraffes of East Africa have a love affair with acacia trees. They love acacia trees, and they've got the long, long necks so they can eat the leaves at the top. But the acacia leaves don't like being eaten. But their response takes 5 minutes. They send out, pheromones that are very destructive, that the giraffes don't like the smell of it. But it takes them 5 minutes to send it out. So if a giraffe is at one tree and is eating leaves from this tree, this one can't defend itself, but it sends out pheromones that go downwind, and by the time the giraffe gets to the next tree, it's already secreted all these pheromones that the giraffe hates. So in some senses, The acacia tree is deciding who it wants near it and who it doesn't want near it. That, for me, is some element of free will. So plants have a little bit of free will at that stage. Then you move to the next stage, would be the animal kingdom. And now animals not only have movement capabilities, not just can sway and turn, they can actually move, which means they can choose their own environment. If an environment is too difficult for them, they move. There are birds that migrate 12,000 miles every year, depending on weather conditions. So there's free will in the sense that they have total choices over their own environment where they want to live. So now we're looking at free will really moving along. And then there's human beings. So we have all of the above. We have mobility, we got movement, we've got migratory patterns, we can choose to live where we want to live. And as well as that, we're learning to control our environment. So if we're stuck in an environment, we can learn to try to control that environment in some way. You can put on the air conditioner in your house, for instance, if it's getting too hot. So there's a way in which you can control your environment. So that would be like the evolution then of the notion of free will on planet Earth. My fifth point then would be, what are the limitations on free will? And there are limitations because free will is very different from freedom. So what are some of the limitations? So for instance, in utero damage, a child, for instance, who's born to an addicted mother can arrive out with what's called fetal alcohol syndrome, where the baby's brain actually is not developing properly. So even in utero, the environment can significantly reduce a child's ability to make choices. The birth process itself, if the child is denied oxygen during the birthing process, that can affect the brain. Postnatal injuries of various kinds. In fact, any illness or any disease or any disability, whether it's a mental disability, cognitive disability, emotional disability, or physical disability, that can kind of reduce our number of choices in lifetime. There are also limitations like the political regime under which we live, or the church of which we're a part, or the education we receive, our fear, our societal expectation. So there are a whole bunch of limiting factors. So we're not totally free to do as we will. Now, the mistake we make here very, very often then is we confuse free will with omnipotence. Or we confuse free will with the ability to do as we please, or to have total control over the outcomes. That is not free will. Free will does not mean that I have total control over the outcome. And free will does not mean that I am totally in charge of my own destiny in the sense that, I am omnipotent. So we must make this mistake. Free will is not the ability to do what I want. Free will is the ability to choose to put my energy, whether it's mental energy, emotional energy, or physical energy, into any pursuit of my choosing. So free will is not being omnipotent. It is not about controlling the outcome. It's controlling the energy I'm investing in any particular decision. So we mix these things up and then we get ourselves in trouble. So if I can't, for instance, win an Olympic gold medal, I think, then I don't have free will because I'm not able to win a gold medal. Or I can't have free will because I want to be a movie star and win an Oscar, but I can't do it, so I have no free will. You're mixing up free will with the ability, to control the outcome of where you're putting your energy. Free will is about the ability to control where you put your energy, whether it's mental, cognitive, emotional, or physical, not what the outcomes are. There are 7 billion other human beings on the planet, all with their own agendas. Unless you become a dictator, a world dictator, you can't control the outcomes of all your choices. So we have to realize that it's about where you choose to put your energy, not about controlling the outcomes of your activities. So the future, what does the future look like then? So if these are the limitations, on free will, what does the future of free will look like? So let me go back to Paul's writing, Paul's letter to the Romans, where he says, "The good that I would, I do not. It's the evil I do not want to do, I find myself doing. Woe is me, who's going to save me?" And he says, "Thanks be to God for Jesus Christ our Lord." So in some senses then, is Paul falling into the same trap that Paul is saying, it's the devil made me do it, or my flesh made me do it? He's not actually. Paul is saying something really, really important. He's pointing up the dichotomy, the dialectic between the ego and the soul, because there are two parts to us, and they're in constant dialogue and conversation, and sometimes, antagonistic to each other. So every single one of us has two different kinds of intelligences within. There's the native intelligence of the organism, the spacesuit into which we parachuted. If you come into, a kitty cat spacesuit, you have one level of ability. If you come into a human spacesuit, another level of ability. If you come into an ET spacesuit, a third level of abilities. And so the spacesuit has its own intelligence. And the two primary agenda of a spacesuit are survival, so you feed yourself, and self-propagation, which is the very definition, the scientific definition of life. That is the agenda of the spacesuit. That's the native intelligence of any organism, whether it's a little beetle or a human being. It is to survive and to propagate itself. The agenda of the soul is very different. The soul too has an agenda, two items. The agenda of the soul is to achieve unity consciousness and to achieve unconditional love for all God's creatures. That's the agenda of the soul. Unconditional love for all God's creatures and union with Source. So you can see now that these two would have a little bit of a difficulty docking together. They're very, very different agendas. But the soul has come in precisely because it learns that it wants to test itself and find out whether it can bring free will and freedom together while being stuck in the limited spacesuit of ourselves. So the future then looks like, this is what Paul is talking about, this dialectic, this debate, this dialogue between the ego and the soul. On the one hand, I'm attracted to stuff I shouldn't be doing. On the other hand, part of me wants to be aligned fully and become a loving being. How do I handle that dialectic? That's what he's talking about. Now, the thing is, in the future, some of the limitations on free will are going to begin to disappear. And the question is then, what happens then? Free will then, it seems, becomes more and more accessible. So how will some of the limitations disappear? Well, for instance, if many of the limitations have to do with physical or emotional or mental disabilities, more and more science and medical science is going to figure out ways of treating illnesses, improving life quality, longevity. It may well, in fact, be that there will be various kinds of implants that allow us extraordinary vision or hearing or to be able to mind read or whatever. That's all possible. The whole transhumanist movement, in fact, is trying to create cyborgs who are putting, artificial intelligence with, biological systems. So it's well possible that in the future, people will live hundreds of years in totally healthy bodies. It's also possible that more and more human beings are being drawn into living in virtual realities. People are stuck with iPhones and games of various kinds, and people get so invested in games that it's hard to know what's real and what's not real. And that's going to become more and more profound. So we're going to get so invested in simulated realities that it's going to be increasingly difficult for us to determine what is real and what is not real. And in those simulated realities, you can win a gold medal at the Olympics, or become a movie star, or do anything you want. So is that really you? And therefore, are you exercising more and more free will? In the future as well, hopefully with God's help, we're going from being pre-personal beings to personal beings to transpersonal beings. We're going from being pre-rational entities to being rational entities to being trans-rational entities. And trans-rational is not the same as irrational. It's very, very different. So that's on the horizon as well. So many of the limitations will dissolve, which means that free will increase. The question is, what do we do with the free will? Because you can take angels and demons. Angels and demons are much, much more advanced than human beings, and they have much, much more free will. But look at how they do it differently. Angels and demons will use their free will very, very differently. One group for evil and control, and the other for love and compassion. So the very fact that the limitations on free will lift does not immediately translate into freedom for all. And that's the great test. Maybe the simplest test of how far you're developing in your own mission and your own enlightenment is to try to gauge the difference and to narrow the gap between your free will and your freedom. How much are you putting your energy, whether it's mental energy, physical energy, emotional energy, or cognitive energy, how much are you putting your energy into the pursuit of unconditional love and unity consciousness? And that's the measure of enlightenment. At that stage, if you get to that stage, there will be total unanimity between free will and freedom. Namaste. Mark.
In listening to Paul talk, it sounds like he might be struggling against being gay. Do you think he was?
That's a great question. There's a lot of literature suggesting, in fact, that he may have been, and that his struggle was literally a struggle in the flesh against the attractions, the natural attractions within it. So there's a whole literature of biblical literature that's claiming that, in fact, this may have been his primary, what he called the thorn in the flesh. In a few different places in his writings, he talks about this thorn in the flesh, some kind of an attraction to something that was at that stage forbidden. So you're right on. It's very possible. Very possible.
Do you think that demons have been part of this world's creation from its very beginning, or do you think that they arrived here, and demons we're talking nano, as the smallest to the greatest monstrous type, have been here from the very beginning, or did they come at a later time?
So are we talking about the beginning of
creation of this earth?
Of planet Earth. So we're talking 4.6 billion years ago. I personally, I'm of the opinion that planet Earth is the original Garden of Eden. So when we read in the scriptures that the Garden of Eden was God's garden that seeded, I'm totally convinced that some kind of an extraterrestrial intelligence, some people will call that God, some people will call it just, ETs, that somebody took this rock, this third rock from the sun, and began to seed it with life. Now, there are several ways of doing this. So, for instance, meteorites that impact the Earth may be carrying bacteria with them and seeding it in that fashion. And no less a person than Francis Crick, the discoverer of the DNA molecule, was interviewed one time, and he introduced the notion of panspermia, that life on planet Earth was seeded from elsewhere. And he was asked, how could that happen? He said, because they arrived in specially designed, craft. Now, whether he was talking about ETs or meteorites, but something started up the life process on planet Earth. Now, I believe there are parts of this universe, the universe itself is 13.6 billion years old. Planet Earth is only 4.6 billion years old. So there are parts of the universe which are literally 3 times older than planet Earth. Now, if life began elsewhere, it means that it's possible that there are civilizations which are literally millions and millions and millions of years ahead of us technologically. And that doesn't mean just superior machinery. It might mean the ability to supersede physicality or biological systems and be pure intelligence of various kinds. Now, as that process continues, obviously my belief system then is that free will, entities have more and more free will. But how they choose to use that free will is very different. There's no compunction, there's no rule that they have to use this well or badly. And so mythologies are full of creatures, very advanced creatures, angelic beings, who chose to use it for personal control or whatever. So are there energies and entities out there who find that any place life is evolving, they want to have some kind of an input or some kind of control? So I'm totally convinced when I look at the evolutionary trajectory of biological life on this planet that there have been significant interventions from elsewhere, even into our DNA, that there's evidence that human DNA has 4,000 mistakes in it. Human DNA. Animal DNA has about 400. Human DNA has about 4,000 mistakes, where the DNA strands have been cut, snipped, and replaced by something or some forces. Whether these are viruses or bacteria that arrive on meteorites, or whether they're intelligent beings who are actually genetically modifying what's happening, in the very same way that we're doing it right now. We've been breeding animals and plants for hundreds of years. There's a technology now called CRISPR, where you can infuse an individual gene into a DNA sequence and radically change its behavior. So we're on the cusp of doing this ourselves. So why wouldn't entities who are far more advanced than us be trying to genetically engineer, sometimes weed, sometimes clone, whatever they need to do, life on various planets that they have visited? Now, are some of these, angelic beings and some demonic? Given, how life emerges on planet Earth and free will allowing us to make good choices and bad choices, I'm sure that there are beings who've made good choices and bad choices, and if we're their garden, there may be a struggle going on between those who have our good at heart and those who use us as a control mechanism. When I look at stuff like in the human system, The idea of human beings sitting down and setting two dogs against each other to savage each other to death and to put bets on it and to cheer them on, or to take cocks and have cockfighting, killing each other, or to torture a bull, a matador torturing a bull, or to go to a boxing match and watch two guys beat the crap out of each other and everybody's shouting, yeah, 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 yeah. So something in the human psyche is being fed by human distress. The idea, the vision or the witnessing or the observing or the experiencing of human beings in distress seems to allow other beings to really get off on it. Now, if that's true of us human beings, it's probably equally true of more advanced beings. And that it literally may be true that wars on our planet are orchestrated by beings who feed off human distress. So have they been there since the beginning? I believe they have. Ria.
There is your theory, but how about the Big Bang theory that would also work with yours? Because when you're actually telling me this, I'm thinking, you're really out there, okay?
Okay. Tell me something I don't know.
Right, so can't it just be like the Big Bang theory? But, ultimately everything to me is about, I don't understand why when humans get together, ultimately they fight. Right. And it's for power. And also, and you can see that in land, you have Shiites fighting Sufis, you've got Catholics fighting Protestants, but really it's all about land and power. So, and I don't know what this is in people that wants them to do that, but I can't reconcile it to people from other things. I just think it must be, maybe is it part of a human condition as opposed to us being, puppets and there's a big puppet master.
So there's two questions embedded there here. The first one is the Big Bang, as an explanation for this universe. The Big Bang is the greatest, act of faith human beings have ever been asked to make. There is zero evidence, You can't prove the Big Bang. So you're being asked to believe that a massless, timeless, spaceless, energyless nothingness created all that is. So a materialistic science is saying, give us this one miracle, and we'll explain everything else to you. This is a bigger act of faith than the virgin birth or the resurrection of Christ or life after death. And so the idea that the Big Bang is responsible for this, it's a pathetic, hypothesis, in my opinion, even though the word was invented by a Catholic priest. He was a Belgian scientist who was also a Catholic priest. It doesn't explain anything to me. It's just a question of trying to retrofit, take the existing universe, shrink it back in time and space to a time when there was no time, and there was no space, and there was no energy, and there was no place for it to happen, and there was no intelligence, in charge of it, and then all of this came out of it. It doesn't make any sense. So what did happen? You have to transcend dimensions at this stage. To look for a physical explanation for life on planet Earth is to totally miss the boat. You are never going to find a physical explanation that explains life on planet Earth, because you're caught in an infinite regression. This caused, A caused B, but what caused A? Oh, X caused A. What caused X? Or Y caused X. So you keep going back and back and back, and at some stage you have to abandon the physical hypothesis completely and acknowledge that you have to make a jump, a trans-dimensional jump. And you have to acknowledge what the mystics have been telling us for thousands of years. Consciousness is primary. And the reason I think Western science is stuck right now is that it refuses to acknowledge that consciousness is primary. Even though the greatest scientific minds of the 20th century, Max Planck, Niels Bohr, John Archibald Wheeler, these great geniuses, they all averred that consciousness was primary and matter was just an artifact of it. So there's no point in looking for physical explanations for evolution of life on planet Earth. There's some kind of an intervention had to happen in order for the entire process to get going. So we need to make a trans-dimensional shift. Once we make that trans-dimensional shift, we come to the realization something then caused life to evolve on planet Earth. And some creature just put a single cell down there, and what was embedded in that cell? What kind of a program was embedded that would allow it to kind of react to its environment? Would that have been sufficient to create, human beings and poetry, and mathematics? Or at some stage, did some other intelligence, presumably the one who created in the first place, come down and intervene? And at some stages, the kids, of this creator get involved themselves. I was thinking this morning, coming down actually, as I was driving down this morning. Imagine I invented, a computer game, and I create this scenario in which there are different kind of characters. And at some stage, I get more and more sophisticated. So I'm able to build into my game the ability for the players within the game to invent their own game. Now we've got a second level of game going on. So I got 3 characters, Tom, Dick, and Harry. And, I programmed them to behave in particular ways. But then I program them more and more sophisticatedly. So now Tom creates a game of his own in which there's Mary and Julia and Jennifer, and he's in charge of that. And then Mary, at some stage, is able to create her own game. So at some stage, if you intervene in the middle of that series and you pluck somebody out and you ask them, are you real? What are they going to tell you? Of course I'm real. I think, I interact with people. In fact, I created a game. I'm so intelligent, I created a game. So are they real? Well, they were created by somebody above them, who was created by somebody above them, who was created by somebody above them. So are we not real? Is everybody in this church this morning real? Do you really exist? How would you know? All you have is your belief system, your perceptions. Maybe you're living in a simulation, that there's some kid, some cosmic kid with a PlayStation who's created a drama called Planet Earth, and you're the avatars. And you think you're real simply because you can interact with people. But he's pre-programmed you into it. How would you know you're real? You're playing on this station. So we have to figure out then, whoever created this game, if we think it's God, and that God actually gave us free will and freedom, this is not just a game where we've been pre-programmed, but God created thinking free beings because they're bite-sized bits of herself. And she wanted to see what would it be like to experience, being God as a flower, or being God as a mountain, or being God as a human being, and garnering those. And at some stage then, if there have been many, many versions of this game that God's created, and some of them are much more advanced than us. They're angelic beings, and they're looking down at their baby brothers and sisters on planet Earth, making all these kind of stupid decisions. Might they not want to intervene? Might they not want to come down as avatars, like a Buddha figure or a Jesus figure, and say, guys, that's not how to do it. This is what you need to do. So they would be continuing to try to intervene. Now, some of these might come down and actually begin to intervene genetically. Some would come down and intervene sociologically by giving teachings. Others might just change the genome or the DNA sequence, so we're less and less inclined to war. But there may be other, the bully on the block, who wants to beat up the little kid at recess. Other ones who just want to see people suffer, and that literally they're getting off emotionally on watching the pain that they're discovering. And so there's this cosmic battle. And Paul says this many, many times, particularly in his letter to the Romans. Our battle is not against the forces of this world, but of cosmic entities. So there is, and this is the whole reason for Jesus Christ, to come down to try to balance the equation, to try to seed different systems, to put a totally different spin on spirituality. It's not about blindly following laws, it's about aligning with the inner divinity, because we're all bite-sized pieces of God. But in that process, there have been many, many, many interventions. Sure.
I find when we start talking about cosmologies, it takes faith to believe one way or the other. And it's almost a waste of time. I think more along the lines of kind of like the challenge of the light brigade. Ours is not to wonder why. Ours is what to do or die. Not being fatalistic, but just rather than cosmologies and the faith that requires and the sense of mystery, I think it more productive to kind of deal with what we have, how to make it better. And so it's more in the realm of ethics, in the realm of justice, in the realm of those sorts of things, which I think is the real questions that need to be asked and answered.
That's a great observation, Joe. The problem is that in order to set up a system of ethics, you need a cosmology to drive it. What determines what's good and what's not good? So you have to back into a cosmology at some stage. There's no way you can create any system unless you have a belief system, that supports, or hypothesis that supports it. So I agree with you that cosmologies are belief systems. There was a very famous debate at one stage in the 1700s between, John Locke, Bishop Berkeley, who was an Irish bishop, and David Hume, three great philosophers. One of them claiming, that, there's an objective reality, and you can your sensorium gives you the information. Bishop Berkeley responded, the only thing you can perceive are your perceptions. And so you have no idea whether what's outside there actually corresponds with the model that your sensorium and your cognitive processes are creating in your psyche. And so you have to depend somehow, you realize that these are just perceptions. You cannot prove any of these things. It's called the myth of the given. The belief system that the external world, corresponds one-to-one with the internal maps that our sensorium and our cognitive processes, we have no idea if that's true. And so all we can know is we have perceptions leading to cosmologies. Now, I think the response has to be then, since it's all made up, they are all made up, which systems create the outcomes you want? By their fruits you shall know them, is what Jesus says. Which system, which cosmology, which ethical model, which belief system is creating love and harmony and peace and equality and getting rid of xenophobia and prejudices and anger and war? Test them out and see which systems actually produce A and which systems produce B. That's the only way you can indicate that you can actually create a world in which you can live with serenity, and love and compassion. We can debate any cosmologies we want, any ethical systems we want, but all of these are based on some kind of belief system. And as you say, that's an act of faith. So rather than an act of faith, trust, your experiences of life. What systems create love and what systems create warfare? So I think Randy was next, and then Joanna, and then Teresa.
Thanks. We've spoke before of what scientists call junk DNA, sections of the DNA code that they can't explain that says, in effect, do nothing. Could they, either one, be encoding of previous incarnations of us, of memories, or maybe part two, future development of the human psyche or the body to be able to achieve the next level of cognitive togetherness or whatever?
That's brilliant, absolutely. I agree, say yes to both. So I've never believed in this notion of junk DNA. Nature does not create redundant material. So the idea that nature would create, 90% redundancy in the DNA sequencing and only 10% which is active doesn't make any sense whatsoever to me. So it must be that it's latent abilities that need particular kinds of environments in order to get expressed. So I've used this example before. 1 billion years ago, there was no color on planet Earth. Does that mean that 1 billion years ago, the sky wasn't blue, and daffodils weren't yellow, and grass wasn't green? No. It simply means that 1 billion years ago, the eye had not yet been invented. The eye was invented by a little insect called a trilobite 545 million years ago. So before that, there was no consciousness on planet Earth that could infer color from the electromagnetic spectrum. So in the absence of the appropriate witnessing consciousness, nature is not free to reveal particular aspects of itself. So it's not junk DNA, it's DNA waiting for the appropriate environment in which to express itself. So I heard a very interesting podcast a few months ago of a scientist. He was one of the guys at JPL, the Jet Propulsion Laboratory, who created the rover that went to Mars. And he was asked by the interviewer, have there been any medical experiments conducted in outer space? He said, yes, actually, on the ISS, the International Space Station, they've done medical research, and one of the extraordinary findings was that some of the junk DNA gets expressed in zero gravity. So what does that tell you? It tells me two things. It tells me, first, a different environment will allow different parts of the junk DNA to express itself. And why this particular environment? Because we're space beings. We've come from outer space. We're all stardust. Literally, we're all stardust. Every life form on planet Earth is from exploded stars 9 billion years ago. So we're stardust. And therefore, built into our DNA is the ability to express particular features in zero gravity conditions. So there is no such thing, I agree with you, there is no such thing as junk DNA. Nature never creates redundancy. Joanna was next.
I hope I can make this understandable, but you were talking about the confusion, or not confusion, but people who say do a lot of gaming.
Yes.
That their perception of reality kind of enters into their, into a different place. So we have so much violence now in television and movies, right? The first time in my life I ever heard the phrase was in college. Somebody I knew said, I want to go up on a tower and start shooting people. I'd never heard that before, and that was in the 60s. So okay, so what I'm trying to figure out is, and these people who are experiencing being at these mass shootings are saying like, God, it's nothing like when you see it in the movies, right? There's something there that people have in their minds about the way this is going to be. And I was wondering when these types of things started. Like, I don't remember hearing in the Bible, like, and then this guy came in and shoved rocks on top of a crowd just to kill people, or somebody long ago just, took down a bridge so everybody going on across the cart would die, other than warfare. And so I'm just wondering, when is this, these things that we're seeing now, is this new to the generations of?
It's not new. It's different, but it's not new.
Okay.
It's not new in the sense that since the beginning of time, we have embedded in our mythology war stories. You go visit any mythology you like in the world, and most of the stories are war stories. Our heroes killing their, bad guys. And so, sorry. Okay, this is the last answer. That our good guys killing their bad guys. So we've embedded in our mythology the war story. When television began and you looked at cartoons for 2- and 3-year-old kids, what were the 2- and 3-year-old kids watching? Give me some of the cartoons they watched. Tom and Jerry. And what does Tom and Jerry do? They're chasing and trying to kill each other. The Roadrunner's getting killed, run over. Yeah, so they're all violent. This is what kids are being indoctrinated with, in 2 and 3 and 4 and 5. Now we just reached a different stage where by age 6 or 7, kids are able to differentiate at some level between what's on television and what happens, in the schoolyard. But at this stage, our gaming is becoming so sophisticated. When the original games were started, I remember playing a game on a 64 little Mac. You remember these little guys, where you're shooting down space aliens just by hitting keys, and there are these little bubbles go pop, pop, pop. That was the extent of the technology. Now it is super realistic. You've got your own avatars yourself. And so more and more and more, people are entering into games which are programming them to destroy and to kill. Now, I don't think it's the games themselves are wrong. It's the particular games. You could create games like, for instance, How to Build a Civilization. I believe there's such a game out there, How to Build a Civilization. You could create a game on how to, build world peace. So it's not gaming per se. It's the kind of games that are being promulgated by whoever is in charge of the agenda. And a lot of those games certainly are very, very violent. And the whole background to drone technology, where somebody sitting, in a room in Colorado can send a drone to Pakistan and kill people. It's just another form of the game. And so we've extrapolated the game from just watching stuff on screens to actually taking human lives right across the other side of the world. So we're living in a violence culture which is being fed by particular kinds of games. Before we continue with our Eucharist, let's offer each other a sign of our peace.